Hello, I'm James.
Hi, I'm Jimmy.
Welcome to A Job Done Well.
The podcast about the world of work and how to improve the daily grind. Morning, everyone.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. So this is the second of our two-part episode on redundancy. Today we are talking about being made redundant, something that's happened to all three of us. Is it a blessing or a curse? We're going to be sharing our experiences and perspectives on what is often a taboo subject, but shouldn't be. And we think we've got some insights on how to ensure it's a more positive, liberating experience rather than a cross to bear. This will help you out if you have ever been under the threat of redundancy. When it happens to you, as it surely will, you will be prepared. So, how's everyone been since our last episode?
Well, the thing that happened to me last weekend, which was very good, was I was chatting to a friend of mine who is a GP. And we were talking about as you get old, ailments as you get older.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I gave a chapter and verse, went on a bit. And she said to me, it's very simple, James. All you need to do is eat well, sleep well, and exercise well. And if you've got those three things covered, you can live forever.
Simple.
So there you go.
That was top advice.
You know, every year you get sent for a health check for work. And every year there was a new, slightly more invasive procedure that you had to tolerate as you get older.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you could always tell how old someone was when you start talking about their health check and you'd compare what they'd had done.
Yes, all the parties the NHS invite you to as you get older.
Yes, like MOT. Anyway, that was me. There's my update.
What have you been up to, Amanda?
Since we last met, I had a lovely evening out with a very dear friend from, I've known her for years and years. Now we went to the theatre, which is not something I do very often.
What did you see?
I should do more often. Went to see Six. It's based on the wives of Henry VIII. It was a musical. It was fun.
I am completely obsessed currently with Nottingham Forest avoiding relegation. So this episode will go out either around the time when Forest are safe or they've been relegated. But at the moment when we're recording, it is uncertain, and I am on edge. So we are talking about redundancy because essentially it happens to all of us. And it has happened to all three of us, hasn't it?
It has, yeah.
On more than one occasion.
So you've either faced this or will face this at some point in your career. And it can be difficult to handle.
Yeah, and that is either, you've been in one of two situations. It will either be your choice, you've stuck your hand up and you've decided you want to go, or all of a sudden somebody's told you you're no longer wanted. But actually both ways, because I've experienced both, and both are really quite hard. You feel rejected, you feel inadequate, and it's a difficult thing to get your mind around.
However, equally, sometimes it can be a liberating even, and a life-changing experience.
Yeah, it can be. I found myself at 40 and being made redundant, and my wife was pregnant. I was signing onto the dole with an unborn child. But there you go.
So, in terms of the background to it, it really does, or it certainly used to have a real stigma attached to it, didn't it?
Absolutely.
But I think that is, we were talking last week about the whole idea of a job for life. And you join an organisation, you stay with that organisation, and most people didn't move. And so actually, if you were made redundant, it probably was a very unpleasant thing and had big implications.
It did, yeah. But I do think that it does often, when companies are making people redundant, they do have criteria that judge you, and so it is quite easy to feel good enough that you have been rejected because you haven't reached the bar that company has set in terms of the people they want to keep and who they're letting go.
Yeah, particularly when it's small numbers. I mean, one of my exes, which we'll talk about in a bit, but was where the whole branch was going. So I imagine that's easier
slightly
to deal
different.
with.
Yeah, and I think there are, as you rightly touched on, we talked about this last week, there are lots of different types of programs.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, a whole branch or organisation would be tough, but that's different from being selected as an individual and being compromised out as an individual, which often means you come to a one-to-one compromise agreement with an organisation for you to go and not to talk about it or darken their door again.
Well, and that assumes, of course, there was a compromise offered.
Yes.
Yeah, so it can be worse than that for some people.
Yes, that's true. And I guess we should just caveat the discussion we're having with the fact that we won't necessarily be talking about the specifics of the processes and the organisations that we went through, but it's more about the emotional side of things, because obviously there are certain restrictions that we would all have about what we can and can't talk about around previous employers.
Yeah, I must respect that.
In terms of what happened and how did it make you feel, James, do you want to kick things off?
I'll go first. Well, it's happened twice to me.
Yeah.
Once was of my own making. So there were conversations and I stuck my hand up from it.
Yeah.
And then on another occasion, it was a total bolt from the blue. I had no idea that it was going to happen at all. And it's strange. It's a bit like, it's like a failing relationship. You know, you feel this sense of loss. It's like breaking up with a girlfriend because, well, it's like what it is. It is a broken relationship.
Yeah.
So this thing that you put so much time and effort into, all of a sudden that is taken away from you and you feel rejected. I think some breakups are just easier to handle than others.
Yeah.
Two organisations that it happened to me with handled it very differently.
Right.
And one I came away from and I will only ever say good things about that organisation.
Yeah.
And the other one I came from and I have nothing good to say about them. But bizarrely, when push came to shove at the end of it, financially, it was pretty much the same. It was just the way it was dealt with. So, yeah, just...
It goes back to something that we were talking about last week, which is you can often judge an organisation by their recruitment and redundancy processes, and how you're treated on the way in and how you're treated on the way out often is a good indicator of A, the values of an organisation, but also B, what life is going to be like in the organisation, isn't it?
Yeah. And you bounce back. I think that's the key point as well, you know. So I think on both occasions I came to the conclusion, well, I'm in a better place, or I ended up in a better place. It just takes a while to get to that point.
But if you take those two experiences, James, one was more difficult in some ways than the other, did that impact how you bounced back, or what you felt during that bounce back?
Yes, because I think when you have made a decision to go, then you hold yourself accountable for that. And so you do move through the change curve faster, I think. Whereas when it comes as a bolt from the blue, then it just really destroys your feeling of self-worth for a little while. And that does take longer. And it's... What's the point I'm trying to make? It's totally subjective. You are the same person on both occasions. If you're made redundant from a place and it is just you, then to be honest, you probably weren't the right person for them and it wasn't the right place for you. So it is in some ways a kindness for it to have happened. It just didn't feel like it at the time.
And as we touched on last week, there's processes that have to be followed, but there's ways of following the process.
Yeah.
So you end up on the wrong end of the wrong leader managing a process in the wrong way for the wrong organisation is going to feel quite different.
Oh, and the occasion when it happened to me, which was unpleasant, my wife had a cancer scare, so he asked me whether or not my wife was okay, and then 30 seconds later was making me redundant. I mean, you couldn't make it up. It was dreadful the way it was handled. But you get over these things, don't you?
Yeah, it is. What would he have done if you had said, no, she has got cancer?
Well,
did he have two
can you imagine
conversations
if you
with
got
you?
two skips? Well, the thing is, of course, that actually the more David Brent-esque the situation is, the better you feel about it afterwards. Yeah, because do you really want to work for these people? So it's not a dead loss when something like that happens.
Well, and you've rationalised that now,
Yeah,
to be fair.
absolutely.
In the moment, it matters a great deal how the leader manages that process.
Yeah, this is why people shouldn't be called leaders. But anyway.
Well, yeah, and hopefully the tips we've given before will help with that a little bit. In my experience, it's a long time ago, and there have been a number of times where I've been made redundant or in that process, that at-risk process.
I think that's the other thing is you don't always get made redundant.
Exactly.
You get at risk and you have that period of uncertainty, and that's equally, I think, some of the things we're talking about apply to that.
Oh, that's never happened to me. I've never been at risk.
Oh, have you not?
No, I've just been out.
Well, even that has a strange set of emotions attached to it, of course, because, well, one, whilst you're in that process, you don't, no matter how good you are, I think we talked about this before with some people that you might think, well, crikey, why didn't they realise they would never be going? But actually you don't. As soon as you're in a process which describes you as being at risk, then you play out all the scenarios that go with that. What if I do lose my job? How am I going to make, how am I going to earn some money? How am I going to support my kids or my family and what have you? But yeah, that's difficult. So I guess
Yes.
my answer to the question, how did it make you feel? It's an emotional roller coaster at the time, particularly when you feel, which we would all hope most employees do, feel committed and engaged and loyal to the organisation and enjoying the work and feeling like you're creating value for the organisation. So consequently, I think whether you've decided that you're going to put yourself forward or you are selected or a whole branch of people are going, whichever is the scenario, it always feels personal.
Yeah.
Because it is, even when, it could be a team change
And,
effect.
sorry, build on your point, emotional roller coaster, but absolutely it is, because when I look back at what has happened to me in the cold light of day a number of years later, you can look at the facts of it and say, well, where was I financially? Where was I at that stage of my career? What were my aspirations? And when you look at it like that, quite often it was the best thing that could happen to you. However, when it's happening there and then, you let go. It is, you can't control the responses. A slave to your own emotions.
As you say, Amanda, you can quite often try and rationalise it by it's not personal, it's just a process, I've just got to do this, whatever. But the reality is, it is very personal, and you can't react any other way other than the feeling that it is personal to you.
Yeah, I mean, so on the very sad side of this, there have been a few people actually that I've interviewed on this topic since, just because I'm deeply interested from a leadership perspective and helping leaders in this difficult situation to be able to manage these processes as well as you can. But words that have come up in the extreme are shame.
Yeah.
Like, how isn't that just strikes me?
Well,
as
do you remember
such
to cut across, but what's the film, the Full Monty?
Yes.
And the bloke gets made redundant.
And
he
still goes out to work.
Still goes out to work.
Yeah. Rejection, I think you said that earlier. The difference between us, though, on the positive side for me, something you said earlier was, this did actually lead to a career change for me.
Yeah.
That it was the catalyst for me actually moving into learning and development, in all seriousness.
It's happened to me a couple of times, and they've been of my engineering, but still, I did feel afterwards feelings of rejection and loss, because it doesn't matter, even if you're happy to be moving on and you change career or you get better opportunity, there will be feelings of loss, as in that's what I did every day for a number of years, that's the organisation that I showed loyalty to, I had friends with.
I think that's and that's a big point actually. So you might think your boss is the son of Satan, but there are all those people that you work with on a daily basis.
And you've lost them.
You've lost
them as friends, you know what I mean? I had people that I would have sat next to and worked with every day, closely, really got on well, and many of them I probably never spoke to again when I left the organisation. Some of them I do, but a lot of them you just never see again in your life.
Yeah, and it's that whole point of loss, and it isn't so much the financial loss, because actually most people can find another job, but it's the loss of camaraderie, the social loss of it.
I think also, in my experience, the leaders that I worked with didn't always treat me that well. I think at times, we touched on last week, they abdicated conversations. It's so easy to let HR deal with this and let HR people have those conversations, and I think that's just weak, and it doesn't feel like you're treated with respect. I also noticed that I became yesterday's man very quickly.
Oh,
you know what I mean? No one wants to talk to you anymore, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you suddenly discover all the people that go around you, they're not really bothered about you anymore. And I think I felt really bad for the people that I left behind. So when I moved out of some of those situations, I moved out of organisations that at one point was in a challenging period of transition. I felt bad for the team that I was leaving behind, and so I think you can feel a range of emotions, but
another one,
but they're all unique, aren't they?
Yeah. But sorry, another one to pile on. But in terms of loss, quite often it's a loss of identity. Yeah, when people say, what do you do? Oh, I do this job. But we do condition ourselves. We identify with the job,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that's taken from you. And
Who are you?
yeah, who are you? What do you do? How
Yeah.
do you add that? Yeah. It's quite difficult.
The other side of being made redundant, which again we touched on last week, is also the survivors, the people who are left behind. I felt guilty leaving my team behind, but for those people that are left behind, sometimes you do get, I don't know if you heard the phrase performance punishment. If you're really good, often you'll never get made redundant. That's just the reality of some organisations. So you can sit there doing a great job, getting all these high ratings and performing really well, and you look at these people that are not doing as well, that actually they get made redundant, they get walk off with big checks, and you sit there and all you do is get more work,
Yeah.
and more work, and more expectation of you. It's like performance punishment. Because you're performing well, people punish you with more work.
Yeah.
The other part to that, actually, Jimmy, that you caused me to think about as well is that survivor guilt as well. So when it's friends or people that you've been close to are still in the organisation, it almost makes the conversation become awkward because they're still there.
Yeah.
So do they tell you about the things that they're excited about in their career? Well, of course, as friends, that's something you might normally talk about, but then does it become difficult territory?
Yeah.
And, I'm still part of this. It's really important that people can feel that they can continue to go on and celebrate what's good about what's happening in their careers too. So hopefully there's the stigma part, which we're hoping to minimise, but also that part about how do you stay in touch. It's almost like, perhaps it's a horrible analogy to draw, but when somebody has lost someone close to them, someone's passed away sadly, it's like, I hope I don't bump into them in the street because I won't know what to say. It's almost that kind of scenario that gets set up between people that would have been friends. I feel guilty now about still being there or taking on a role. Anyway,
Well,
So
complicated.
talking of grief, let's just hold that thought for a second. We'll come back to that after we have a word from our sponsors.
We cover a whole host of topics on this podcast,
From purpose to corporate jargon.
but always focused on one thing: getting the job done well.
Easier said than done. So, if you've got unhappy customers or employees, bosses or regulators breathing down your neck,
If your backlogs are out of control and your costs are spiralling, and that big IT transformation project that you've been promised just keeps failing to deliver,
we can help. If you need to improve your performance, your team's performance, or your organisation's, get in touch at jimmy@ajobdonewell.com.
or james@jobdonewell.com. Right, after that fabulous advert, let's go back to talking about grief then.
Yes, and there is a model that a lot of people are familiar with, which is the change curve, which did originally come from people's reaction to grief.
Oh, death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many of you have heard of the change curve. We thought it was worth mentioning because it's not precise, it is directional, but in our experience, it does really resonate in terms of how you experience things. So
Yeah, and a lot of people will pour scorn on the old, what is it? It's the Kubler-Ross change curve, isn't it?
Yes.
And they will find fault with it, but I think it is useful.
what are the stages you go through on the change curve?
Oh, good question.
Well, the first one being denial. Often the case, I can't believe this is happening. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
Surely this isn't happening.
Yeah.
Then on to,
Anger. So really being very,
how are you doing this to me?
yeah, why are you doing it? I could think of a couple of choice words there.
Third stage is bargaining.
Yeah, well, what's bargaining though?
It looks a bit like, well, I can deal with this if it's not just me, or this would be okay if
Yeah.
kind of scenario. So you're moving past that stuck part into starting to come to terms with it, I think, a little bit.
And the fourth phase?
Downright depression. Yeah,
Okay, so that's a
almost
dip.
like- yeah.
How's this happened to me?
Well,
And then finally,
Rationalisation, I think, or acceptance.
Yes.
Like coming to terms with this has happened, so what am I going to do about it to move?
moving on. in
Moving
other
on.
words. I guess the point is with these stages, they're often drawn as a curve,
Yes?
but it's not really how you experience it. You go backwards and forwards between the stages.
You
The
do.
intensity of the stages can vary,
Oh, and you can hang on to bits as well,
Yeah.
so you can be angry, for example, for a very long time.
Yeah.
And once you've got over it.
So the intensity varies, the duration varies. It's not necessarily linear, but I guess it does help you understand the sorts of emotions you'll go through or other people go through when they're experiencing change.
Yeah.
And that's quite useful for both understanding, but also then how do you respond and support either yourself or others?
Yeah, when they're going through that and iterating through that as well, because different things can trigger. I remember, so the scenario I was describing, obviously we'd had the news about being made redundant. It was a branch closure. I was the branch ops director at the time. Before the actual closure itself, I was then offered another job, funnily enough, in a different part of the organisation, to stay on and teach other people to do what I had been doing. So arguably quite excited at that point to be starting and embarking on what then became a new career, learning and development. But on the day we closed the branch, literally,
Yeah.
I turned out the lights, locked the door and handed in the key. I went home and sobbed my socks off.
I bet.
Literally the saddest day of my
it is
working
really,
life at that point.
And I remember vividly on both occasions. Well, I remember vividly on actually every occasion I've left an organisation. You remember your last day because it is sad. Even if you've decided to go of your own free will,
Yeah,
it is just it's sad.
yeah.
And I think that sadness comes often, as we said, from saying goodbye to people,
Yeah.
of which, if you think about however many hundreds of people you work with in an organisation, how many people do you actually stay close to after that day versus all those people that you then never see again?
Yeah.
But they did mean a lot to you.
Yeah.
So I think that sadness is, whether you're open about it or not, that sadness comes from that realisation of that part of your life, that social, network that you are part of, you are no longer part of. It's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
So where does that take us then? What are the common themes?
Well, I think the change curve helps show you that the changes that you have in emotion are normal. You will go through those phases one way or the other. They may vary, but that is perfectly normal.
It is. And you will go through a range, and it might be it can almost be moment to moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Roller coaster,
And if
yeah.
you are going through the roller coaster, that is absolutely normal. Everybody does.
Yes.
Yeah. And all you can do actually is hang on, probably find somebody to talk to about it.
I think that's one of the difficult things, is that often, to your point, Amanda, if it's a whole branch that's closing, there is a little bit of camaraderie. You're all in it together.
That Dunkirk spirit.
Yeah. However, when it happens to you as an individual, it can be quite a lonely place. So I think your point, James, about find someone to talk to,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter who it is in some ways, but
Yeah.
it's more about somebody who's willing to listen to you.
You have to keep positive. So whenever it's happened to me, maybe I'm very lucky, but it has been okay.
Yeah.
I found other interesting things to do afterwards. The world doesn't stop. It's just that for a little while, the world stands on its head, but it will be okay. You've got to keep positive about it.
Yeah, and I think that positivity also helps you overcome some of the fears that you might experience. So, the fear of the unknown, and the fear of what happens next, and the fear of you're not good enough, you're inadequate, all the rest of it. All those natural feelings. I think remaining positive is important. As I say to my kids regularly, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right.
Henry Ford, that mate, apparently.
There you go.
I like the notion of, in the space of positivity, if you can get yourself in a good space to be able to think about this as perhaps a catalyst for something new. One of those things you've always wanted to do. If you're lucky enough to be provided with some retraining by your organisation, perhaps it's about exploring a job you've not done before, or something you think actually you might have a talent for but haven't had an opportunity to do.
I think one of the things you can always do, which is something you should do regardless of being made redundant or not, is be prepared for changes in your life. Be prepared that your work might not last forever. So you should always have your CV up to date. We should always be spending some time networking, You should always be spending time learning about what it is you do and what the latest things are happening. And that's regardless. So if this happens to you, if you invest some time in those sorts of activities, you'll be ready to embrace this change.
Oh, yeah.
Practically.
Well, absolutely. Make your own luck. Because, frankly, no job is permanent. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Yeah, even if it's a job for life, you're still going to leave when you're 65. Yeah, no job is permanent. So get on and make your own luck.
I remember in one of my coaching conversations with someone talking about, they were talking about actually creating their plan B. And actually what we came to was perhaps it's the plan A. You should build into the plan A what you will do when you're no longer doing this, which we rarely do. I mean, I'm listening to myself giving this advice and thinking, yeah, right. But actually, I genuinely believe have the expectation that the point you leave, this is what you will do next.
Yeah.
What other advice would we give to people in this? So we talked about the fact that it will happen to people. We talked about our personal experiences. We talked about the change curve and how we all go through it. We talked about some of the common themes. We're now starting to talk about the advice we give people. Any other bits of advice you'd give?
Yeah, I strongly advise you to look after your mental health because you're on this emotional roller coaster. Now, whatever that might be for you, go out, go for a run, listen to some music, go out, socialise, go for a walk in the woods, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you really do need to do that. Don't dwell on it because you find yourself in a dark place.
Super important.
Yeah, and I think all those things, I think it's about momentum. It's about going and doing something, whether it's exercise or getting out or seeing people. Just sitting and dwelling and being introspective, that's not positive thinking about the future. That will only really drag you down, and you start to get into that vicious circle in terms of your mental health and your mood.
Yeah, talking of circles, that circle of influence, circle of control.
What's that?
You know that it's a tool, I think this also comes from 7 Habits, but it may be used more broadly, but to figure out those things that actually are completely outside of your control. So this branch is closing, for example, not within your control, and focus your attention on the things that you can influence. So advice like updating your CV, going out for a walk, starting to think about, reaching out to your network, putting your energy there as opposed to that kind of broader perspective which you can't influence.
As the prayer of serenity says, and the wisdom to know the difference between those two.
The other thing is taking control. I would advise you get clear on your rights. There's lots of information on the internet. Some organisations do this very well, some organisations do it badly. If you are being treated badly, you do have rights. You should understand what they are. Because actually, once you go through that, it helps you get through the whole thing. But yeah, that's another thing I think you should do.
And ultimately, I think your own personal response to it is perfectly normal. As we've touched on, we've been through situations where we did it through our choice. It was engineered through to whole branches closed, and the responses that we had, they're all normal. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just the thing to focus on, as you touched on, Amanda, is then, well, what's your response to that happening? And how do you do some of the things that we've just talked about being prepared, about looking after your mental health, and about being ready to open up new possibilities?
Another piece of advice, I'm full of sage advice, but it is, like I said, it's like a breakup of a relationship. So don't jump into the first job that comes back your way, because it's a bit like, the next girlfriend being the one on the bounce. You want to be careful of that, yeah? So it's just think about, where do I want to be, not just I need a job, and take the first one that comes your way.
Yeah, I think you touched on, Amanda, you had a complete career change, didn't you, as you went through this?
Complete career change, and what a joy too. I mean, here we are, some
podcasters.
30 years later. Podcasters now, yeah.
Who knew?
So, words of wisdom, what is the one thing that you would recommend people do when they find themselves in this situation?
My one thing would be just be kind to yourself and understand that whatever emotional reaction you have is perfectly normal.
And probably tied into that mind would be make sure that you do look after your mental health. Go out for a run, exercise, all the things we've talked about, but be aware and take care.
Yeah, and mine, which is obviously the best because this is the last one.
Obviously.
So this is the point we will finish on, but make your own luck. Take control of the situation.
Take control.
Okay, hopefully you found today's episode on how it feels to be made redundant useful. We thought it was really important for us to help open up that conversation and continue to remove the stigma, because it is an important part of work and performing at work.
And so if you find yourself in a position where you have been made redundant, there are plenty of resources out there that you can go and look at which will help, not least of which I thoroughly recommend you have a look at the ACAS website, because that spells out exactly where you are from a legal and technical perspective. And from a mental health perspective, there are lots of things online that you can find, everything from Mental Health UK through Mind to the Samaritans and the NHS, but do go and find somebody to talk to. Thank you for your time, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers now.
If you'd like to find out more about how James and I can help your business, then have a look at our website, jobdonewell.com.